The historical context of the siege of Jerusalem by the Assyrian army. Around 701 BC, the Assyrian Empire, the most powerful military force of its time, launched a large-scale campaign against the Kingdom of Judah, with Jerusalem as its ultimate target. Under the command of King Sennacherib, the Assyrian army, boasting 185,000 well-trained soldiers, advanced through Judah with unstoppable force, capturing fortified cities one by one. With their advanced weaponry, brutal siege tactics, and psychological warfare, the Assyrians had built a fearsome reputation as an empire that crushed all opposition. Their tactics were not just based on military strength, but also on terror and intimidation, ensuring that many cities surrendered without a fight. By the time they reached Jerusalem, the people of Judah knew they were facing an enemy that had never been defeated. This was not just another military campaign for Assyria, it was an assertion of their supremacy and dominance over the region. Years earlier, in 722 BC, the Assyrians had destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, leading to the exile of the 10 tribes who vanished from history. Now, Judah was the last remnant of the once united Israelite nation, and Jerusalem stood as the final stronghold. To the Assyrians, conquering it would solidify their unrivaled control over the Near East. However, for the people of Judah, this was more than just a battle for survival. It was a battle of faith. Jerusalem was not only their political capital, but also the spiritual heart of their nation, home to the temple of the Lord, where they worshipped the one true God. At the center of this crisis was King Hezekiah, the ruler of Judah, who now faced the greatest challenge of his reign. Unlike many kings before him, Hezekiah was known for his faithfulness to God. He had undertaken extensive religious reforms, removing pagan altars and restoring true worship in the temple. But now, faced with the unstoppable might of Assyria, he had to decide whether to submit, seek foreign alliances, or trust in divine intervention. The situation seemed hopeless, as city after city had fallen, and now Jerusalem stood alone, surrounded by a seemingly invincible enemy. Yet, despite the overwhelming odds, Hezekiah refused to surrender, setting the stage for one of the greatest acts of divine deliverance in history. Against the world's most powerful empire, only a miracle could save them, and a miracle was about to happen. Hezekiah's faith and preparation for the siege. As the mighty Assyrian army advanced toward Jerusalem, King Hezekiah understood that he was facing an overwhelming military force, one that had already crushed countless cities and kingdoms. Unlike many rulers who would have panicked or sought refuge in foreign alliances, Hezekiah chose a different path. He placed his trust in God while also taking decisive action to prepare Jerusalem for the impending siege. His leadership in this crisis was not just a demonstration of political strategy, but also of unwavering faith. From the beginning of his reign, Hezekiah had set himself apart as a righteous king, committed to restoring true worship and eliminating idolatry from Judah. He removed the pagan altars, destroyed the Asherah poles, and commanded the people to turn back to the one true God. His efforts were not merely symbolic. They were a spiritual revival that strengthened the hearts of his people at a time when they needed it most. At the same time, Hezekiah took practical steps to fortify Jerusalem. Anticipating the possibility of a long siege, he initiated one of the most remarkable engineering projects of the ancient world, the Siloam Tunnel. This underground water system redirected water from the Gihon Spring into the city, ensuring that Jerusalem would have a continuous supply of fresh water, even if the Assyrians cut off access to external sources. Without this tunnel, the city could have easily been starved into submission. But with it, Hezekiah ensured that his people could endure a prolonged siege. Additionally, he reinforced the city walls, built new defensive structures, and increased the production of weapons and shields to prepare for the inevitable battle. His dual approach, faith and action, set a powerful example, proving that trusting in God does not mean passivity, but rather a balance between divine reliance and wise preparation. Yet Hezekiah's greatest strength was not in his military strategies, but in his spiritual leadership. When the Assyrians sent messengers to intimidate and demoralize the people, mocking their faith and threatening destruction, Hezekiah remained steadfast. Instead of responding in fear, he sought the Lord in prayer and encouraged his people with these words: "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria, for there is a greater power with us than with him." 2 Chronicles 32:7. As the Assyrian threat loomed over Jerusalem, Hezekiah's combination of faith, wisdom, and preparation would soon lead to one of the most miraculous deliverances in history: the Assyrian threat and psychological warfare. As the Assyrian army surrounded Jerusalem, they did not immediately launch a direct attack. Instead, they employed one of their most effective weapons: psychological warfare. The Assyrians were not only feared for their military strength, but also for their ability to break the spirit of their enemies before the battle even began. Their strategy relied on intimidation, mockery, and manipulation, all designed to convince the people of Jerusalem that resistance was futile. Leading this campaign of fear was Rabshakeh, a high-ranking Assyrian official sent by King Sennacherib to deliver a message of doom. He positioned himself near the walls of Jerusalem, where his voice could be heard by both the city's leaders and its ordinary citizens. Speaking in fluent Hebrew rather than the diplomatic language of Aramaic, he ensured that everyone could understand his threats, making his words even more terrifying. Rabshakeh's speech was calculated and strategic. He first mocked Hezekiah's leadership, portraying him as weak and incapable of protecting his people. He ridiculed Hezekiah's reliance on God, comparing the Lord of Israel to the gods of other nations that Assyria had already conquered. Then he attempted to sow doubt and fear among the people by claiming that their God would not be able to save them. His words, recorded in 2 Kings 18, verse 33 to 35, were full of arrogance. "Has any god of any nation ever delivered his land from the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arpad? Where are the gods of Sepharvaim? Have they rescued Samaria from my hand?" He insisted that Jerusalem's fate was already sealed, just as countless other cities had fallen before the Assyrian war machine. But Rabshakeh did not stop at threats. He also attempted to persuade the people to surrender voluntarily. He promised them a seemingly comfortable future under Assyrian rule, saying that if they submitted, they would have their own land, food, and water, rather than suffering the horrors of siege warfare. This was a classic Assyrian tactic: offer false hope while spreading despair. However, despite his efforts, the people of Jerusalem remained silent, obeying Hezekiah's command not to respond. 2 Kings 18:36. This silence was more powerful than any argument. It was a declaration of trust in God. While the Assyrians tried to weaken their faith, Hezekiah and his people stood firm, preparing for God to answer their prayers in a way that would shake the Assyrian Empire to its core. Hezekiah's prayer and Isaiah's prophecy. Faced with the overwhelming threat of the Assyrian army and the psychological warfare of Rabshakeh, King Hezekiah knew that Judah's survival depended on divine intervention. Rather than responding with fear, Hezekiah turned to the only source of true power, God himself. Upon receiving Sennacherib's threatening letter, in which the Assyrian king boasted of his military conquests and mocked the God of Israel, Hezekiah took the letter into the temple and spread it before the Lord. 2 Kings 19:14. This simple yet profound act symbolized his complete dependence on God, acknowledging that only the Lord could deliver Jerusalem from destruction. His prayer was not just a plea for survival, but a recognition of God's sovereignty. Hezekiah prayed, "O Lord, the God of Israel, enthroned between the cherubim, you alone are God over all the kingdoms of the earth. You have made heaven and earth. Give ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see." 2 Kings 19:15-16. His words demonstrated deep faith as he recognized that Assyria's previous victories were against false gods made of wood and stone, but the Lord of Israel was the one true God who ruled over all nations. In response to Hezekiah's prayer, the prophet Isaiah delivered a powerful prophecy that would change the course of history. Isaiah's message was clear. Sennacherib had not just insulted Jerusalem, he had insulted God himself. The Lord declared through Isaiah that Sennacherib's arrogance would be his downfall. Whom have you insulted and blasphemed? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes in pride? Against the Holy One of Israel. 2 Kings 19:22. God made it clear that Assyria's power was not of their own making, but had been allowed by him for his divine purposes. Now, because of Sennacherib's pride and blasphemy, his downfall was certain. The Lord promised that Jerusalem would be spared, and that Sennacherib would not set foot inside the city, nor shoot an arrow there. 2 Kings 19, verse 32 to 33. Instead, he would return home the way he came, not as a victorious conqueror, but as a defeated king. Isaiah's prophecy was not just a message of deliverance, but a testament to God's absolute authority over the nations. While Hezekiah had turned to God in humility, Sennacherib challenged the Almighty in arrogance. The stage was set for one of the greatest divine interventions in history, proving that no earthly power can stand against the will of God. Divine intervention, the miraculous defeat of the Assyrian army. As the Assyrian army surrounded Jerusalem, ready to unleash its full military force, the fate of Judah seemed sealed. The people within the city walls had heard the terrifying threats of Rabshakeh, the boasts of King Sennacherib, and the overwhelming might of the 185,000 soldiers camped outside their gates. But while Assyria relied on its sheer power and military dominance, Hezekiah and the people of Jerusalem placed their trust in the Lord. That night, as the Assyrians prepared for their final attack, something extraordinary happened. An event that would forever be remembered as one of the greatest acts of divine intervention in history. The Bible records this event with stunning simplicity. That night, the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 in the Assyrian camp. When the people got up the next morning, there were all the dead bodies. 2 Kings 19, verse 35. In a single night, the greatest army of its time was completely destroyed, not by swords or human strategy, but by the hand of God. The text does not go into detail about how the deaths occurred, but the impact was undeniable. The once invincible Assyrian war machine was utterly crippled. The soldiers who had mocked and threatened Jerusalem were now lifeless, their weapons useless, their might reduced to nothing. This was not just a military disaster. It was a supernatural event that defied explanation. News of the catastrophe quickly reached King Sennacherib, who had confidently declared that no God could save Jerusalem. Now, he found himself in an unthinkable position. His mighty army had been annihilated overnight, and he had no choice but to retreat in disgrace. As Isaiah had prophesied, by the way that he came, he will return. He will not enter this city, declares the Lord. 2 Kings 19:33. Sennacherib fled back to Nineveh, humiliated and defeated. His story did not end well. Sometime later, as he worshipped in the temple of his god Nisroch, his own sons assassinated him. 2 Kings 19, verse 37, fulfilling yet another prophecy. This miraculous victory was not just about Jerusalem's survival. It was a testament to God's sovereignty. It demonstrated that no earthly empire, no matter how powerful, can stand against the will of the Almighty. Through faith and divine intervention, Judah was saved, and history bore witness to the truth that God alone reigns supreme. Historical evidence and archaeological confirmation. The miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem from the Assyrian army is not just a biblical account. It is also supported by historical and archaeological evidence. While the Bible provides a detailed narrative of how God intervened to destroy the 185,000 Assyrian soldiers, various ancient records and discoveries confirm key aspects of this extraordinary event. One of the most significant pieces of historical evidence is the Sennacherib Prism, a hexagonal clay artifact inscribed with the official annals of King Sennacherib himself. This document, now preserved in the Oriental Institute of Chicago, records Sennacherib's campaign against Judah, including the siege of Jerusalem. However, what is most remarkable about this inscription is what it does not say. Unlike his accounts of other victories, Sennacherib does not claim to have conquered Jerusalem. Instead, he merely states that he shut up Hezekiah like a caged bird, a stark contrast to his usual boasts of total destruction. This conspicuous silence aligns perfectly with the biblical account, suggesting that something extraordinary prevented Assyria from taking the city. Further support for this event comes from Greek historian Herodotus, who records a strange disaster that befell the Assyrian army in Egypt, mentioning that a plague of mice or rats caused their weapons to fail. While his version differs from the biblical record, it still suggests that the Assyrians suffered an unexpected supernatural calamity during their campaigns. Additionally, archaeological excavations in Jerusalem provide further confirmation of Hezekiah's preparations for the siege. The most famous discovery is the Siloam Tunnel, an impressive engineering feat designed to redirect water from the Gihon Spring into the city. This tunnel, mentioned in 2 Kings 20:20, allowed Jerusalem to withstand the Assyrian blockade by ensuring a steady supply of fresh water. Visitors can still walk through this tunnel today, a physical testament to Hezekiah's foresight. Another significant find comes from Lachish, a major city in Judah that was destroyed by the Assyrians. Reliefs from Sennacherib's palace in Nineveh, now displayed in the British Museum, vividly depict the brutal siege of Lachish, showcasing the power of Assyrian warfare. However, there are no such reliefs of Jerusalem, further supporting the idea that something prevented its conquest. Through these discoveries, secular history confirms key details of the biblical narrative, demonstrating that the fall of the Assyrian army was not just a legend, but a real historical event. This archaeological and historical evidence stands as a powerful reminder that God's promises and interventions are not just matters of faith, but also of recorded history. Lessons from Hezekiah's faith and the deliverance of Jerusalem. The miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem from the Assyrian army is more than just an ancient historical event. It carries timeless lessons about faith, leadership, humility, and divine power. One of the most profound lessons from King Hezekiah is his unwavering trust in God. When faced with an impossible situation where military strength and human strategy seemed hopeless, Hezekiah did not panic or surrender. He turned to God in prayer. His act of spreading Sennacherib's threatening letter before the Lord, 2 Kings 19:14, was not a sign of weakness, but rather a demonstration of absolute faith, acknowledging that only God could bring victory. This teaches us that in moments of crisis, our first response should not be fear, but prayer, not trusting in human solutions alone, but seeking God's wisdom and intervention. Another key lesson is the importance of balancing faith with action. While Hezekiah trusted in God, he did not sit idly by. Instead, he took practical steps to prepare Jerusalem for the siege, strengthening the city's defenses and securing its water supply through the Siloam Tunnel. This reflects the biblical principle found in James 2:17. Faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. True faith is not passive. It moves us to prepare, work, and act wisely, while still depending on God for the final outcome. Additionally, the downfall of King Sennacherib serves as a powerful warning about the dangers of pride and arrogance. He openly mocked the God of Israel, believing that Jerusalem's fate would be the same as every other conquered city. However, his boastful words were his undoing. Proverbs 16:18 states, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." Sennacherib's fate, his humiliating retreat and eventual assassination by his own sons, demonstrates that no human power, no matter how great, can stand against the sovereignty of God. Finally, the deliverance of Jerusalem reminds us that God is faithful to those who trust in him. The people of Judah remained silent in the face of Rabshakeh's threats, 2 Kings 18:36, choosing faith over fear. Their salvation was a testimony to God's power and his promise to defend his people. This story reassures us that no enemy, no challenge, and no hardship is greater than God's ability to deliver. Just as he was with Hezekiah, he is still with us today, fighting battles on our behalf when we place our trust in him. The relevance of Hezekiah's story for our generation. The story of King Hezekiah and the miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem is not just an ancient historical account. It carries powerful lessons that remain relevant for us today. In a world filled with uncertainty, challenges, and opposition, faith, trust in God, and wise action continue to be essential. Just as Hezekiah faced an overwhelming enemy in the Assyrian Empire, Many people today face battles that seem impossible to overcome, whether personal struggles, societal pressures, or crises of faith. The key lesson from Hezekiah's response is that when confronted with great adversity, we must turn to God first. Instead of relying solely on human wisdom or earthly solutions, Hezekiah prayed and sought divine intervention, demonstrating that true strength comes from faith, not fear. His story serves as a reminder that God is still in control, even when circumstances seem hopeless. Another lesson we can apply today is the balance between faith and preparation. While Hezekiah fully trusted in God, he also took practical steps to protect Jerusalem, fortifying the city walls, securing water supplies, and strengthening defenses. This principle is crucial in our daily lives. We are called to pray and trust in God, but also to act wisely and responsibly. Whether facing personal difficulties, making important life decisions, or standing firm in faith amidst opposition, we must follow Hezekiah's example. Prepare, act with wisdom, and trust that God will handle what we cannot. As it says in James 2:26, faith without works is dead. The downfall of King Sennacherib also provides a timeless warning about the consequences of pride and arrogance. The Assyrian king believed his power was absolute and mocked God, only to be humiliated and ultimately assassinated by his own sons. This reminds us that no earthly power, no matter how great, can stand against the sovereignty of God. Proverbs 16 verse 18 states, "Pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall." Today, many reject or challenge God's authority, just as Sennacherib did, but in the end, only God's kingdom remains unshakable. Most importantly, this story reassures us that God is our defender. Just as he delivered Jerusalem, he continues to protect, guide, and fight for those who trust in him. No matter how overwhelming our struggles may seem, God is greater than any enemy we face. As Romans 8:31 declares, if God is for us, who can be against us?